Hey guys, and welcome back to my channel. It is Diana if you're new here. It's been a while. I am finally here. It's been a crazy past couple of months. I feel like there's been a lot of things going on. My personal life, school life, you know, this whole blow up with the coronavirus has been starting and escalating, and it's just been crazy. I've had like zero inspiration for my channel, which sucks because I feel like right now I'm at the brink of when my channel should be like growing and I'm just not doing work essentially. So I think the first thing I wanted to say is if you guys have any recommendations for videos you want to see from me, please shoot them down below because I'm really struggling right now with just ideas, especially now that we're quarantined. I feel like I'm just losing my mind at home, and it's anyways, the long-awaited video that you guys have been waiting for months has finally came. I'm gonna start off by showing you guys how I actually make my study guides and give you a more in-depth look on how I do it, and then I'll kind of show you the studying process because that has changed now, especially under quarantine. I've had to do a little bit of adjustments, and I just think with the difficulty of my classes this semester, it's a lot different than first semester by like 1,000,000%. It's insane how different they are. So I think I had to switch a lot of things around in order to make it work. But I don't know. Let's just jump in because I feel like this might be a lot. So I have a lecture here pulled up, but first I'm gonna go into a plain Word document. Right now I'm gonna show you formatting first because I format my study guides the same way. So the first thing is I'm gonna double click up here to the header, and I'm going to create a header. Now I am very specific with my fonts and everything. So I do Times 10-point font all around, and I'm going to do a center. So that is there. And then the next thing I'm going to do is adjust my margins. I think there's a way to do this in the settings, but I just do it on the computer. So you guys can see I go over here to the ruler and I move it to like 1/2 inch, I believe is what it is. So I think the default is a 1-inch border. And then I'm gonna do it also for the bottom. So move it down. And I just like the look of wider margins. It gives you more space to type. Now that that is done, so we have our header, and I adjusted my margins to 1/2 inch all the way around. And now I'm gonna go in with my headers for each section. So I'm gonna switch this to Times 10-point font. I do single spacing, nothing crazy. So for every lecture we have a lecture like title, like what these lecture slides are going to consist of. So I bold it and I underline it, and I'm going to title it Pharmacology of Coagulation Disorders, just like that. And then I always will include what chapter this is coming from in the textbook. So for this case, this is chapter 38. And then I do a colon, and then I will highlight this and put it in gray. Now you can do any color. I only have a black and white printer, so I only do gray. Okay, so this is the sample one that I just created for you guys. Now I'm gonna move over. This is my actual study guide that I made for this section, the coagulation disorders. So, but you can see this is my header. Here we first started talking about clotting, so I just did like a what happens thing, and then I bold type every category of drug. So here our first drug was heparin, and that is our anticoagulant and indirect thrombin inhibitor. And then the next category was anticoagulant vitamin K antagonist, which is warfarin. And then we go on to all of our separate drugs. And then here would be the start of a new lecture. So this is corticosteroids and immunosuppressants. So all of that was for the coagulation disorders. So that is essentially how the study guides are made. A lot of questions I've gotten is, do I transfer everything over? And the answer is no. So for my pharmacology class, I create tables in my notes, and I basically copycat everything that she did. So here you can see I have the route, onset, duration of time, indications. I have all of that here. So everything that she had in the lecture, I basically verbatim write it in the chart because that's just stuff that we need to know. And anything that she highlights there or bold or italicizes, I will also do that because she's telling you that you should know it. So here I have HIT, the measure, prothrombin time, 6 to 8 hours after changes. You can see the same thing as highlighted on that slide. Now, this slide is probably a couple of minutes long. However, this is the only thing she's showing for heparin, which is that. Now, the rest of the stuff that she says is up here for heparin. So this is stuff that's not written on any slide, but it is stuff that she says. So the antagonist, protamine sulfate, we have some stuff about the drug molecules, a high alert, stuff about the prothrombin time, the TI, other similar drugs. We also talked about Lovenox a little bit, and then just kind of just random information that she didn't write out but is important to know. So then I will put that in bullet points. Anything, like I said, anything I think is important, I will underline or bold. But you can see how this translates over. So she showed us this, and from this, I created this. It really depends on the lecture slide. Sometimes I will write more, which here for pharmacology, usually I will write more because usually she talks more than just this stuff in the tables. But other classes, sometimes I write less because it's just, you just know that information. It's pointless to write out everything. So hopefully this kind of gives you an idea of how I do it. Like I said, I will bold the topic, and then here I have our prototype drug heparin. Same thing here, our new class of drugs, orthoprototyping warfarin. It is the same here. I will always classify the drug. I will highlight the prototype with an actual highlighter once I print it, and then I will keep going, and so on and so forth. In my notes, sometimes I will also put different pictures. So here I have this picture. It came from our lectures slide, and it's also in our textbook, and this is just an extra something if I don't want to type out everything. This one being actions and indications of corticosteroids. Sometimes I'll put in pictures. So this is a picture dealing with immunosuppressants. But you guys can see my pharmacology lecture notes pretty much look the same for every test because I just do it the same chart, and I find that that keeps it the most organized. That is how I create my study guides. I know that you guys probably wanted more, but there really is not more. I think the formatting for me is like most important. I format all my study guides the same way, and I'm going to show you guys examples of other study guides from other classes so you guys can see how similar they look. And I don't know, I just think visually they look very appealing and I enjoy it. So that is how I make my study guides. Like I said, there really is no rhyme or reason to it. I kind of just listen to it, and what I think is important, I will write it down. I will try to format it in the easiest way possible that's best for me. So sometimes that means writing exactly what she's saying. Sometimes that means shortening it down so it's not like a huge cluster of words. But again, that's really just something that you kind of have to play by ear, and you have to decide what is best for you and your knowledge. Alright, so hopefully that kind of gives you a gist of how I create my study guides. I really just wanted to highlight formatting because for me, formatting is everything. Like I said, all of my study guides look exactly the same, and they are just so visually appealing. I cannot stress it enough. I don't know why I'm such a visual person, but it just makes it so much easier to read when it's all neat and clean and they all look the same. You don't have to be that crazy with it, but that's just something that I need in my study guide. So now I'm going to kind of talk about how I do it, when I do it, the timeline, and all of that stuff, because it has changed since my first video. So in the first video, I kind of talked about doing everything a week in advance before my exam for that class, and it pretty much still holds true. However, I am a little bit more lenient on timing just because these lectures are so much longer, they're harder, the information is dense, there's a lot of requirements within these classes, and then with clinicals it was just a lot to kind of keep it the same format, so I don't really do that anymore. So I'm much more lenient on the timing, but I still try to aim for a week in advance if I can. If I can't, I'm not going to stress it. And then the next thing I kind of switched up from that first video is that I do not re-listen to my lectures. Now, the biggest reason is a lot of the lectures are not as useful to re-listen to. Like, I don't really get anything from it re-listening to it. And like I said, they are very long, so it's almost wasting my time to re-listen to them. And trust me, getting through it the first time is pretty dang hard, and it takes a lot out of me to listen to these guys sometimes. So I do not re-listen to my lectures, but I do still try to designate a single day learning a certain section or a certain module, as I talked about it in the first video, because our modules, we have about usually 3 to 4 modules per exam. So I usually will try to designate one day studying one module, and sometimes one module will consist of 2 to 3 lectures, and then I will just focus on that one day and then break it up between the days so I'm not overwhelmed studying. How do I study it? Basically, I rely on textbooks this semester, and that is very different from first semester, because first semester I basically used them as a supplemental aid, whereas this semester I am pretty much relying heavily on the textbook. I do read majority of the chapters in the textbook. Now, I'm not taking notes on them. All the notes that I have are the notes that I printed out from my study guide. So I'm not taking notes, but sometimes rereading it is a lot easier. I will read more heavily on stuff that I'm a little bit more unsure of versus the stuff that I'm pretty okay with. I will kind of just skim through it and just read the big important stuff. And then if I showed you my study guide again, all like the writing and pen, that is what's coming from the textbook. I will usually write it out, and specifically for classes I will read more heavily on certain sections. So for pharmacology, we stress a lot on like mechanism of action for the drugs, like what is it doing to your body specifically, and then kind of like side effects and maybe any sort of interactions. Those are the kind of things that I focus more on with pharmacology, whereas with my med surg class we focus a lot on like clinical manifestations and treatment and kind of big diagnostic stuff that you will see in certain conditions and diseases. So it differs for the class, but you just kind of have to learn to see what is most heavily tested on. I kind of want to show you the extra stuff that I will do when I'm studying, because this is a little bit different than first semester. So I'm gonna quickly, so going back to that same pharmacology study guide that I've been showing you throughout this video, something that I did when I was studying was just take a plain sheet of paper, and here I went into more depth about opioids, adverse effects, and these are like specific ones. And opioids was a big section in this whole like lecture series, so I wanted to read this section in the textbook, and these were the notes that I took from that little small section. I did write down the page number that it came from so I could reference it, but here this is pretty much talking about all of the clinical manifestations. Here I have some nursing interventions for respiratory depression and just kind of going through. So if there are big topics in the lectures that I know will be heavily tested on, I will take the time to, like I said, read that section in the book, take my own notes, and then I'll kind of attach that to the overall study guide. So then that's what I would be studying. This is my mental health class. This was our exam 2. This is the study guide. I do have post-it notes for added stuff that they talk about in the textbook that needs to be expanded on. This one was like my most heavily written on because it was very heavily tested. Basically just write the crap out of these. They look a lot cleaner when I first print them out, but like I said, when I'm studying them and I read along with the textbook, I write down a lot more stuff and highlight. Another thing that I used to study mental health was the mental health drugs. These are our psychotropic medications. So this one is just a a chart of all the different classes. So here you can see I have my antipsychotics, I have indications, and then the type, so first gen, second gen, third gen, and then the drugs within, and then what is its action. So here our antipsychotics are going to block dopamine, whereas our second and third antipsychotics are going to block serotonin and dopamine, and then kind of just some information, so like nursing intervention, some big side effects. Here you can see these are first line treatment. Woken is a big one for our second gen antipsychotics, and then I basically go through all the different classes. I have antidepressants on one whole page because there's a ton of them. Sedative, our benzos, non-benzos. So this was just a really helpful chart just to kind of break it up. And then another thing that I did is just writing it out. I've been doing a lot of writing out on separate pieces of paper. This is just something that I would do like the night of or the morning of an exam, just to kind of write everything out all at once. Here's another example of me writing things out. I took just a piece of paper and I kind of like stapled it into my notes, but this is just kind of covering the different clinical manifestations of chronic kidney disease and the different systems of the body. This was heavily covered on our exam. I really wanted to make sure I emphasized that, so I took the time to do that. When I'm writing them up, that's when I'm studying them, so I will split it up. So let's say I was studying for this med-surg exam, and I was just going to be looking at the diabetes section, which was 14 questions on this exam. So I would cover everything for diabetes, which was that page, this page, this page, this one, and here. So all of that was dealing with diabetes. It's a huge section of our test, which is why it was a huge chunk of our test. So if I was going to be studying that, I would look at all of those pages and read that section in the textbook as I needed. So okay, so now that I showed you what my study guides look like, how I break it down, the last thing that I want to talk about is just some extra resources on how I'm studying. So going through the study guide per section with the textbook is my main source of studying. That's where I take the most time to do my studying and where I get the most information out of it. But just the like icing on top, you could say, added is I do have online like access codes to our textbooks, and they usually have like summary sheets on there. They have different care plans you can look at, and they also have quizzes, like different sets of quizzes. So I will definitely look at those for every section or like every chapter. Sometimes a section has like 4 or 5 chapters and I have to go through all of them, but I will do that for every chapter section for every exam. Another thing is the textbook at the end of the chapter also has like a little summary, and sometimes they will also have questions for you to do, so I will also do those. And then my teachers will send out like review PowerPoints, or they will have review Zoom sessions where they kind of go through like a case study or like a PowerPoint that kind of is reviewing the key stuff of the entire section and kind of putting everything into practice, and not so much like words and information. It's now being applied to like a real life situation. And the last thing I wanted to talk about is practice questions. I mentioned how med-surg is like the hardest class I've ever taken, and I will stand true to that until I die. The biggest thing for med-surg is practice questions. Sometimes I even question if I want to study my lecture notes, because a lot of it is kind of useless because of the way that the questions are written. It's really hard to kind of try to explain it, because quite frankly I don't even know how to describe it myself. But I found that the best way to study for med-surg is just looking at a ton of practice questions and reading the rationales. So if you can get your hands on any sort of like practice question like test bank, definitely go through those, because first, they're kind of testing your knowledge on like that NCLEX style questioning, and then you can also see the rationale as to why the other question or why the other answers were wrong, and then why that one was right. That's pretty much everything that I wanted to talk about. I'm so sorry if this video was very cluttered and annoying. I didn't know how else to film it. Let me know if you have any other questions. That is everything I wanted to show you guys. Hopefully this was helpful. I try to keep it very clean. Basically, it's not as organized as it was first semester. I'm definitely not as organized as first semester. I don't plan out my weeks anymore. I also do a lot of my planning on my computer now, since I have a new computer. Leave your video request down below. Shoot me a comment if you have any questions, or a DM. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you for sticking with me, and let's talk, because I'm very bored and we can keep each other company. Please subscribe, please like this video, and I will see you hopefully very soon.